Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and it's nice to be back with you this Saturday evening. Happy Easter to all of you. I'm going to be talking tonight about the fundamental differences between libertarians on the one side and conservatives and liberals on the other. Oftentimes people ask, well, what is a libertarian? What is it that makes y'all different from the liberals and the conservatives? And those of you that are libertarians, I'm not going to be saying anything you don't already know, but sometimes it's important to refresh ourselves on fundamental principles, the principles of libertarianism. What is it that distinguishes us from these statists? And if you're new to libertarianism, somebody has referred this video to you. Well, this will kind of explain to you if you're curious about, well, what is libertarianism? Why is it becoming so popular? What's going on here? Well, this will give you a sort of an introduction to what it is that separates libertarians out from liberals and conservatives. Now, notice that I put liberals and conservatives in the same camp. Now, you see, they don't like that because they go through this standard little game that they've been going through for decades, about the so-called left-right debate in America. I mean, we've all heard it. We've grown up with it. Conservatives versus liberals, and sometimes a liberal will marry a conservative, and the mainstream press, most of whom are statists, they go gaga over this, and they say, oh, how is a conservative going to get along with a liberal? And well, it's all nonsense, at least from the perspective of libertarians. The reason they get along is because we know that there's not any difference between them. Not philosophically, not in terms of moral principles, not in terms of what should be the role of government in a free society. There's fundamental agreement between liberals and conservatives on all these issues. And so, the big debate you see that goes on between the left and the right and so forth, and you're going to see it in the upcoming presidential race, it's this notion that, well, whose reform plan is going to be adopted? Is it going to be the Republican reform plan, or is it going to be the Democratic reform plan? And they've always got a reform plan. They're all going to exclaim against federal spending, but they've all got a plan to save Medicare and save Social Security and save the empire and save the occupations and all over the world and so forth. And they're always convinced that their particular reform plan is going to be the one that actually ends up saving the day. And of course, the Republicans are playing this game now. They'll say, oh, just, elect me and I'll have my reform plan. And boy, this will, every day, glory days will return to America. Everything will be fine. Well, the Republicans were in charge. They often forget that. They were in charge 8 years before that. And of course, we can go back decades in which they held, both houses of Congress, the presidency, and so forth. And of course, they didn't accomplish anything. I mean, things have only gotten worse and worse and worse economically, and in terms of freedom too. The measure of freedom of the American people has just gotten worse under both Republicans and Democrats. And now, of course, we're facing a precipice in terms of debasement of the dollar, federal government bankruptcy, debt that's unbelievable. You got Standards and Poor now threatening to downgrade U.S. debt, if you can believe that. And so the stakes are very high here. And of course, though, the standard mindset is, oh, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to go with left versus right, and the mainstream media gets involved in the game, and the average American gets involved in the game. And of course, the last thing liberals and conservatives want to do is hear about libertarianism. In fact, a lot of average Americans don't want to hear about it. They want to keep thinking that everything's hunky-dory by playing this game of musical chairs, Democrats, Republicans, as as we're heading toward the precipice up ahead. And well, what libertarians do is we come along and we say, look, there's a reason why this country's in the throes of despair and economic woes and so forth. It's precisely because of the statism of both liberals and conservatives. So we offer an opposing philosophy, an opposing paradigm, an entirely different way of life as compared to the statists, the liberals and the conservatives. Now, I call them statists because they look to the state to be their savior, to be their salvation, to be their provider, their sustainer, their protector. You know, the state for the liberal and the conservative is everything. I mean, it's just their everything. It's their daddy. It's their mommy. In many respects, it's their God. I mean, because when times get tough, they look to the government. Oh, please help me out. Please help me out. I mean, they look at it as a deity. And that's not the way libertarians look at it, you know. Now, what I'd like to do is discuss some of the broad, differences philosophically, morally, and so forth between libertarians and the statists, and then, but really just go down program by program and just give you a little synopsis of where libertarians stand on each of these programs. Compared to liberals and conservatives. We'll look at how they believe too on these programs. But if we look at things like the drug war and Social Security and the empire and militarism and so forth, you're going to see some fundamental differences. Now, I may not go into detail as to why libertarians believe certain things on each of these programs, because we're going to cover a lot of them. But in the future shows, I'll be covering them in more detail. What it is that distinguishes libertarianism with respect to these different programs. Now, philosophically, libertarians are totally different from liberals and conservatives. We ask a very fundamental question. What does it mean to be free? And for us, our meaning of freedom is totally different from that of liberals and conservatives. Their meaning of freedom is the extent to which government is providing for them, and through what we call the welfare state, and that's where we get Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education grants, community grants, all kinds of grants, farm subsidies, and so forth. And then the other aspect of this is the warfare state, the extent to which the federal government is abroad, establishing stability and order in the world militarily. That's how they measure their freedom. And that's why, if you go up to an average liberal or conservative and you say, do you live in a free country? He will say, oh, yes, I do. I'm proud to be an American because at least I know I'm free and the troops are dying for my freedom, and the government gives me my Social Security, my Medicare, and my Medicaid, and we ought to be thankful that we live in a free country. That's their measure of freedom, okay? The state, providing stability and order in the world through military force and so forth. Libertarians take a different perspective. We say, no, that is not freedom. That is not genuine freedom. Freedom is the right of an individual to engage in any peaceful activity that he wants. That's the only condition, that his conduct has to be peaceful. He can't go and initiate force. He can't have violence against another human being. So there's going to be no murder and no rape and no stealing and burglarizing and fraud and in other words, a direct trespass against the rights of someone else, that you cannot do that. But otherwise, freedom means engaging in any choices you want in your life. And so, okay, then the next question then is, well, what is the role of government in a free society? Well, there's a split among libertarians. There's some libertarians that say, well, if we're going to have a free market, then why not let the free market generate the apparatus that sets forth, that protects the free market, which is government. Well, there's some that they call themselves, anarchists or free enterprise anarchists or whatever, where they're saying, well, let the free market generate the apparatus. Others, including me, say, well, no, the market presumes, all these choices that people are making presumes an apparatus, and that apparatus is government, with a monopoly of force that's going to punish the murderers and the rapists and the thieves and the people that are initiating force against others. So in other words, we libertarians think the role of government in a free society is not to provide you with payments, with welfare and Social Security and education grants. It's simply to operate as a defensive force that's going to punish murderers, rapists, thieves, and so forth, and otherwise leave you free to live your life any way you choose. Again, your conduct just has to be peaceful. So you can tell that philosophically, just right off the bat, our perspective on the meaning of freedom and the role of government in a free society is totally different from the statists. All right. Now we also have a strong emphasis on moral principles. We libertarians, for example, we believe that it's wrong to take what doesn't belong to you. That's stealing. Okay. Now liberals and conservatives would agree with that. They would say, yeah, thievery is wrong. If a guy holds you up, he goes into a bank and robs a bank, that by golly, he should be held to account for that, punished, prosecuted, jailed, or whatever. But the difference between us, between the libertarians and the statists, is the statists say, but if the state does that, now remember, that's why we call them statists, because they look to the state as like their daddy or their deity or so forth. If the state does this, if government does this, if the government takes money and gives it to another person, then that's okay. Well, libertarians say no, moral principles cannot be abandoned that easily. If it's wrong to take money from one person and give it to another person, then it's equally wrong when government, which is simply the agent of the citizenry, does it. So, for example, if I go out and hold you up in a dark alley and I take all your money, let's say you got $5,000, if I go and, let's say, give that to the poor, we all would agree, statists alike, that that's stealing, that that's wrong. The difference is that if government does it, the statists say, oh, well, now it becomes glorious. It becomes compassionate and caring, and everybody's a good person in this society. The IRS agent and the Congress and the bureaucrats doing the accounting and the distribution, and the citizens who are doing the voting, and maybe even the children who are children of the voters and so forth. Libertarians say no. Okay, so that's the basic philosophy, sort of gives you a little bit of a taste of just morally speaking, philosophically speaking, the difference between libertarians and liberals and conservatives. Let's take an example, first program tonight, the drug war program. This is really a classic way to distinguish whether somebody's a libertarian or not. For me, it's a litmus test. If somebody cannot see, why the drug war violates fundamental principles of liberty, then he just can't be a libertarian. Because it's so clear for libertarians, it's a no-brainer. It's just black and white. Why? Well, the idea is that you, as a free person, have a right to engage in any peaceful activity. Remember, that's the defining principle of libertarianism. We call it the non-aggression principle, that as long as you're not aggressing against somebody else, violating his rights, then you're free to do whatever you want. Now, that may mean that what you're engaged in is self-destructive. It may be foolish. It may be dangerous. It doesn't matter. Libertarians would say, you have a right to do it. You may just spend all day long just, reading comic books, or, well, I don't know, comic books are kind of constructive. You may spend all day long snorting cocaine. All right? We would say, that's your right. Now, we may not agree with you. We may think that, hey, there's a better way to live life than sitting out there, tripping out on drugs all day long. But that's not the point. The point is that this is your life. This is the one life you were given. You have a right to live it any way you want. That's the core element of freedom. Now, this is where liberals and conservatives are totally different in this sense. They see absolutely nothing wrong with the government punishing a person for engaging in what is purely, self-destructive conduct, or at least, they say it's self-destructive. That's somewhat of a subjective determination. People who take drugs, they do it for a reason, and usually, they determine that reason, but that's not good enough for the statist. The statist says, no, you belong to the collective. You belong to society, and we, the collective, through the force of government, have the authority to punish you for engaging in what we, the majority, consider self-destructive conduct. And so, and that's their guideline. I mean, that since the majority has made it illegal, that therefore you should be punished for it. Well, that's another distinguishing characteristic between liberals and conservatives on the one side and libertarians on the other. We believe, libertarians do, in fundamental rights. That is God-given rights, pre-existing rights, that rights that pre-exist government, inherent rights. That is rights that the majority cannot violate. Now, to a certain extent, the statists believe in that too. For example, where you go to church, I think every statist would say, we don't want that subject to majority vote. All right? Or what you read. Well, conservatives are pretty bad in that area. They want to criminalize a lot of stuff that people read or look at. But at least there's this general notion of fundamental rights. But it's not principled. That's the thing that distinguishes us libertarians. We got a set of principles that guide our life and guide our philosophy and guide our morality. And one of these is freedom of choice, or if you will, in a religious sense, free will. And these things are not subject to majority vote, at least when they are done peacefully. Now, obviously, we wouldn't want the majority saying, well, it's okay to murder and so forth, because, you have a right to your life. That's a fundamental right. And it's wrong to murder. Well, we libertarians don't want government to be punishing people for ingesting harmful substances, regardless of how many people support that. I mean, let's say 95% of the American people in a poll say, yeah, we favor punishing somebody for doing something bad to himself. And it doesn't matter to us. We put it in the same category as going to church. If 95% of the American people said, let's pass a law to force people to go to church, we libertarians would oppose that. So this is what distinguishes us. You see, the Democrats and the Republicans, liberals and conservatives, have been waging this war for decades. Now, notice that they're somewhat hypocritical on this thing. They don't criminalize alcohol, and they don't criminalize tobacco, because a lot of them do it. So there's no principle involved here. They say, oh, well, we're just going to do marijuana and cocaine and heroin and methamphetamine and so forth. Well, we libertarians argue that you don't have the moral authority to do this. This is the right of every single person. And of course, we also argue, those of us that are religious inclined, that Christians, that God has created a consistent universe, and you can tell the fruit of the tree that's pretty rotten. I mean, that they've been waging this war for decades. It's an immoral war for reasons that I have outlined. But it's a destructive war. I mean, this is what's so fascinating. You plant an evil tree, and that's what the drug war is, and you're going to get evil fruit. And so the fruit just gets more rotten and more rotten and more rotten, and we go on for decades, and all we see is just more death, more destruction, more corruption. They got bribes and kickbacks and asset forfeiture, where they're taking people's cars, and the cops are driving around in fancy cars, and they're taking people's cash on the highways. Poor people that deal in cash, and they're saying, hey, come and sue us if you don't like it. I mean, it's an evil, destructive system. In Mexico alone, you know how the statists always say, well, if we just crack down, we'd win this war on drugs. I mean, you've heard that. Let's get the military involved. Well, we always said no. The market forces are so powerful. The more you crack down, the price goes up. This attracts new people into the market, and you end up destroying a lot of lives along the way. You destroy young peoples that are lured in this. They succumb to the temptation. But then you got death. I mean, in Mexico, there's been some 35,000 people killed in the last 3 years. I mean, think about it. $35,000 people in 3 years. It's incredible. Why? Because the military cracked down in the war on drugs. So there's really, from both sides, the moral standpoint that it's none of their business what people are doing, and the pragmatic standpoint, they ought to end this thing. But that shows you, I mean, if you really want to understand the principles of libertarianism, the drug war is the perfect lesson here, because it has the moral case for freedom, that you have a right to engage in any peaceful activity you want, and the utilitarian case that this war is evil, destructive, corruption. In other words, it ends up with all kinds of bad results. So that's why libertarians argue for both reasons: the pragmatic reason and the moral reason. Abolish it, just repeal it, get rid of it, ditch it. And of course, that drives the statists crazy, because they just can't stand the thought that people are going to be free to ingest harmful substances that they haven't approved of. You see, I mean, they'll say, "Oh, well, okay, alcohol. Oh, well, okay, tobacco," but not on the stuff that the majority hasn't approved of. Now, let's go to welfare, and I'm including Social Security in there. Social Security is nothing but welfare. And I know that drives the Social Security recipients crazy. They say, "Oh, no, it's a retirement account. I put my money in. I'm just getting my money back." And they convince themselves, it's sort of delusionary, that there's this fund there, and that the government's just taking out their fund. Like an IRA, when you deposit your money with some investment bank, and they hold your money there, or they invest it in accordance with how you say. Well, this is how the Social Security recipients think about it. They think, "Oh, no, there's a lockbox there. The government's been holding my money." Well, it's not like that at all. And neither is Medicare and neither is Medicaid. These are straight welfare state programs. Now, keep in mind that we haven't always had these welfare state programs. And this is the big revolution that took place when the statists won out. And because there was a huge battle in this country. Would statism prevail or would liberty prevail? And the statists won. That's why we suffer under statism now. Now, of course, the big accomplishment of the statists was not just winning, but also in convincing Americans that nothing had changed, that the free enterprise system was still intact, the free market system was still intact, Americans were still free. I mean, I'm reminded of the great saying by the German thinker Johann Goethe: "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." And I don't think any saying could better capture the plight of the American people, because they honestly believe they're free because they got this welfare, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but the education grants, the whole kit and caboodle, farm subsidies, foreign aid to dictators. That's welfare for dictators. We see a lot of that in the Middle East. Now, the point here is that you've got a moral principle involved, that the state is taking money from one group of people in order to give it to another group of people. It's using force to do that. It uses the Internal Revenue Service or the Social Security Administration. I mean, you don't pay your taxes, and they will come after you. They will prosecute you. They will put you in jail. They will seize your property, and all with the idea that force, and this is where the statist comes in, the force of the state will be used to take one person's money in order to give it to somebody else. With Social Security, the people that are on Social Security today are getting ready to go on it. They had their money taken from them throughout their work lives, but the people that took it are now dead. I mean, a way to see this thing is think about the first Social Security recipients in the 1930s when Franklin Roosevelt revolutionized American life. None of those recipients had put any money in. They just started taking money from the young and the productive and giving it to those people. Keep in mind that the American people lived without Social Security for more than 120-something years because they didn't believe in it. They didn't believe it was morally proper to use government, the force of government, to take money from one person and give it to another person. Same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. Here you've got this principle of statism, that the state should take money from one group of people in order to provide a benefit for another group of people. I mean, these are what we libertarians call socialistic programs. I mean, they're not total nationalization like, Castro did. I mean, Castro's got free national health care. I mean, that's the liberals' dream. That's why they often point to Cuba and say, "Oh, if only we were like Cuba and had free health care and everybody, all the doctors work for the state and so forth." Well, yeah, that's their dream. Never mind the fact that in Cuba, everybody's on the verge of starvation. I mean, on the literal verge of starvation. You see, when there's a lot of wealth and capital in a society, when the statists take over and they start taking from the rich, which is, of course, what every statist wants to do, or the middle class, they get really happy in the early days because there's taken when Castro took all those businesses from the Cuban industries, and businessmen and the homes. I mean, it was like, hey, happy days are here. Look at all the money we got. We'll run these businesses, and so the first few years, the status are like in high cotton. But what happens is over a period of time, the whole system starts to collapse in on itself because there's no more private sector to start stealing from. I mean, it's like a parasite. A parasite comes onto his host, and he starts sucking blood, and he's got to be real careful that he doesn't suck too much blood, though. And so he keeps sucking and sucking and sucking, and all of a sudden, the host gets damaged or even dies. So that's what Castro's done. He nationalized he took everything from the rich. The businesses, the homes. Here in this country, they've had a balancing act. Where we can't kill the host, but let's keep it going. Let's keep him healthy. And over the decades, if things have gotten worse, you've got these like they're shooting adrenaline into the body politic. That's where the Federal Reserve comes in with these injections of money and stuff, because the system's starting to collapse, and as it has in Portugal and Ireland and the welfare states of Europe, where the government doesn't have any more money, and so they come and hey, let's have an injection of the Federal Reserve, and that's the purpose of the Federal Reserve, another artificial stimulus, and so the body starts jarred and everything starts going, and everybody thinks that's things are great and everything, but it's never to be permanent, because that's the thing about this evil, immoral system. It generally leads to corruption, to damage, and possibly even the destruction of a nation. I mean, we saw this with the Roman Empire, with their bread and circuses, and we saw it with the British Empire. The whole system starts to collapse because the private sector can't sustain the enormous tax burden. And so we see that now. I mean, this is what the national debt's all about. This is what your share of that national debt. This is what the Fed's doing now. Printing the money to pay down this debt. I mean, there's already a default. People are saying, oh, if they don't raise the debt limit, there'll be a default. They're already defaulting because when they pay debts with cheap and debased dollars, that's a default. I mean, that's putting the shaft to the guy that loaned the money, and that's what's going on today. But everywhere you look, the welfare states are in crisis, and the United States is no exception. And well, this is not surprising for us libertarians because we again believe we live in a consistent universe. You have this destructive system, this immoral system, and it's going to come and bite you. It's going to ultimately get to you. Excuse me. So we would just say abolish these things. Just get rid of them. I mean, why? Because they're immoral. It's wrong to take what doesn't belong to you. It's wrong to use the government to do that. And we believe in freedom. I mean, we have no doubts. I have absolutely no doubts that you could repeal Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security today, and things will adjust. People will adjust. I mean, that the market adjusts. The market for charity adjusts. You just got to believe in people. You got to believe in the market process. But what happens with this socialistic type programs is that it's so insidious. It causes people to start believing that they can't make it without the government. Oh no, if we don't have Social Security, people will be dying in the streets, and without Medicare and Medicaid, oh, people will be dying of illness immediately. And I mean, all these fearful things. You see it in Cuba today, by the way, too. The Castro brothers are saying, hey, this can't go on anymore. I mean, we're at the end of the road here. And so we're going to have to lay off 500,000 workers. We're going to eliminate subsidies, the rationing system for food and so forth. And everybody's like freaking out, including the commentators here in the United States of, oh no, you can't do that. That'll interfere with Cuba's recovery, and you've got to stay the course with socialism. And well, it's ridiculous. I mean, if you get rid of this socialism, this system of socialism, or these socialistic programs, you got to believe that people will adjust. You know, you got to have confidence and faith in the ability of people to do this. You got to believe in people. Will people need help? Some people need help. Yeah. Well, that's what charity's all about. Excuse me. I mean, that's why that's what freedom's all about. It's not just, the accumulation of capital, making people more productive. Nobody's paying the Social Security taxes anymore. Nobody's paying the income taxes anymore for all these welfare state programs. All of a sudden, that's a lot of money out in the private sector, opportunities for jobs and so forth, and also opportunities for charity to help those in need. Doctors, I find it so interesting how, very few people put faith in doctors to provide free health care for people, just on a voluntary basis. I mean, that's the way it was when I grew up. That doctors made in my hometown. I lived in the poorest city in the United States. That's where I grew up, and doctors' offices were filled every day, and most of the people in the office couldn't pay their bills. But the doctors never turned anybody down, and they were among the wealthiest people in the community. Why? Because the people that could pay would pay, and that was more than enough money. And the doctor just said, well, I'll just subsidize the poor people here. And it was all fine with them. But virtually, we've lost our faith in that kind of system. And many doctors are ready to just get rid of, ditch the whole healthcare system. They're retiring early. I mean, it's really amazing how much doctors hate what they do in life. And they get out early. The people threatening to sue them. You've got the government going after them, Medicare violations. I mean, this is what this rotten tree does. It produces rotten fruit. And that's why Social Security is in crisis. There's no money there, by the way. There's no trust fund. There's no pool of funds. It's a straight transfer money system. They're taking money from the young and the productive, many of whom can't start families because they're financially constrained. They can't buy a house. They're living at home with their parents. I mean, it's a horrible system. And we all know about Medicare and so forth. I mean, it's just going out the gazoo, and with debt and spending and Medicaid. But notice what the statists say, and that they're always going to come up with a reform plan. I mean, have you noticed every Republican candidate's got his reform plan? Oh, well, if you'll just adopt my reform plan, I know we're going to win. Just elect me. Just put my reform plan in. But, they never say, let's just repeal these things. Let's reestablish a free society to our land where people are free to accumulate everything they have. It's their money. Let them decide about honoring their mother and father. Taking care of others. Let charity be entirely voluntary. You're never going to hear that. It's always reform, reform, reform. How can I save Social Security? How can I save Medicare? Well, for a libertarian, there's nothing worth saving because it's an evil system. It's bad. It's a bad tree. It produces corrupt fruit. We should never have ever gone down this socialistic road. And now that we're there, the question is, are we going to continue going down that road, which is the road to bankruptcy and moral debauchery, or get off the road? And this is what libertarians are saying. It's time to get off the road before it's too late. It's like being on the Titanic and seeing that iceberg. And you've got the statists saying, oh, keep plowing ahead. We can make it. So what if we hit the iceberg? We can just plow right through it. And libertarians are saying, veer, get back on the right track, the track on which our country was founded. Now, let's talk about foreign policy. Another big area of difference between libertarians and liberals and conservatives. Now, libertarians believe in a limited government republic, okay, where government exists as a republic, where its powers are limited to those enumerated in the document that calls it into existence. This one being the Constitution, and where its jurisdiction is limited to here in the United States. So that its laws apply to people here in the United States living or touring or whatever. And the idea is that you've got government remember I said, what is the role of government in a free society? Well, one is to punish the murderers and rapists and thieves and so forth. Another one's to provide a judicial branch where people can resolve disputes by going to court instead of shooting it out in the street. And then to defend the country, if some other nation invades the United States or attacks the United States militarily, then we libertarians say the government needs then to come to the defense of the country. But that's legitimate defense. We're talking about when a nation state attacks or invades the United States. To give you a good example of defense, think about when the U.S. empire attacked Iraq. Now, Iraq was not a country that had ever attacked the United States, never threatened to do so. It wasn't planning on invading. And, I know what Bush said about all the WMDs, but, we all knew that. Well, some of us knew it was all false and bogus. I mean, this was a regime change operation. It was a war of aggression that the U.S. waged. Well, the Iraq was put in the position of defense. They were defending against an aggressor nation that was coming in to occupy their country. That's the way libertarians see the matter of defense here in the United States, that if a country ever invaded the United States, that the government's job would be to help defend us. But obviously a lot of Americans would come to the rally, citizen soldiers would rally to the defense of the country, would join up with the armed forces. I mean, libertarians don't believe in conscription, but there's no doubt in our minds that most men and women would come to the defense of their country in the event of an attack or an invasion. Where everything starts breaking down is when the U.S. empire becomes the attacker and the invader. And that's what statists believe. Statists believe in empire. Now, they call it defense. They call it the Department of Defense. But it's no different from when they consider, welfare as freedom. I mean, you can redefine any terms you want, where they said, well, waterboarding is not torture, and torture is only when you're threatening to kill somebody with force, but never when you're doing something just really bad. Well, they're just redefining terms. So you've got this huge military empire that has come into existence in the United States. The U.S. military has bases in around 700 to 1,000 countries. They support dictators all over the world. It's part of the empire. They engage in regime change operations to get rid of dictators, to put new dictators in that are more beholden to the U.S. empire. That's what the Iraq invasion was about. That's what the Libya invasion is all about. Now, of course, they always come up with these little lies about, WMDs are helping civilians and all this, because they need a cover story for the benefit of the statists back home. I mean, the world never buys this nonsense. But the statists back home say, oh, gosh, President Obama's helping civilians, while he's supporting and sending money to the dictators in Egypt and Yemen and Bahrain and so forth, who are out there killing civilians, en masse. But it's a regime change operation. I mean, they just can't tell the truth on that they see an opportunity to get rid of a dictator that hasn't played ball with them, and, they're going to take that opportunity. So you've got this massive, extensive empire. I mean, that's very expensive. What's it costing? Over $1 trillion a year. You got, huge standing army, military-industrial complex, plus, large portions of the economy, private sector businesses furnishing things to this huge military-industrial complex. I mean, the military, Americans don't realize the enormous role that the military plays in American life. I mean, it's comparable to the huge role that the military plays in Egyptian life. And then, of course, you've got all these interventions and the invasions, and they're killing people, and they had the sanctions against Iraq that killed, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children. And so that, of course, then produces the threat of the terrorist blowback, and that's where we get the war on terrorism, which statists love. I mean, statists love big government. I mean, let's just put it this way. Now they want to call it defense, but they love this enormous military and military-industrial complex and all the bases overseas and the order and stability and the support of the dictators, and they love all the welfareism, the bread and circuses. I mean, they love this stuff. And so the war on terrorism was a huge bonanza for them, because you see, before with the Cold War, which is what they were using the communist threat to to support the garrison, what we call the garrison state or the national security state, this huge warfare state, okay? They were using the communist threat, and when that evaporated, well, they needed something else. And for a while, they said, oh, well, the drug war, the military can fight the drug war. Because we libertarians were saying, dismantle the standing army now. There's not any nation state that's got the capability of attacking the United States or the financial capability of getting the necessary, tens of thousands of ships and airplanes and troops and stuff, to cross the ocean one way or the other and get over here and occupy the United States. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Militarily, it is an impossibility. And so now would be the time to do this. Well, the nice thing about what they're doing with Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and Pakistan and now Libya and stuff, from their perspective, is that it increases the anger and the hatred, because they're killing people every day, that then results in the potential for terrorist blowback. And then the terrorists strike, and now we've got a new justification for the continuation of what they've done before, which caused the anger and the hatred in the first place, and they've only made it worse. I mean, Afghanistan is the greatest terrorist producing machine in history. I mean, every time they kill one so-called terrorist, they produce 10 more. And so it's this perpetual motion machine. And of course, you hear it all the time from Republicans. Oh, we got to increase defense spending. And they always call it defense. They're occupying 2 countries. They're attacking 2 others. And they say, oh, but it's defense. And of course, then they say, oh, well, now we got to wage the war on terrorism. And then, oh, by the way, the war on terrorism is then used as an excuse to assault civil liberties for us Americans. So it's a perfect scam. I mean, they go abroad in what the founding fathers called in search of monsters to destroy, like take this Libya thing. They kill people. The survivors, the family members, get angry. They retaliate, and they say, oh, well, now we need stronger government here at home. We need isolationism. We got to build walls around America. We got to protect us from the terrorists and so forth, when they are at the root of the problem and their policies. And now this is what, again, distinguishes the statists from libertarians, that the statists say, oh, no, that foreigners don't get angry when the U.S. government kills them and tortures them and assassinates them and drops bombs on their wedding parties. No. That they actually are indifferent to that, or they like it, according to the statists. No, what really they're angry about is just our freedom and values. And so they delude themselves. They convince themselves that, oh, no, it's not our warfare state that's doing this. It's that they hate that we have Social Security over here, what they term freedom. The statist calls freedom, that we have Medicare, and this is why they come and attack the United States, because of our freedoms, you see. And ironically, I mean, every time you see these people, the terrorists, they talk about their motivation, it's always because what the U.S. government is doing over there. But to the statist, man, he's just not going to pay attention to that, because, you see, that's criticizing the state. Remember I said that the state is looked upon as a deity, like a daddy, like a little child looks upon his daddy. Well, that's the way liberals and conservatives, they don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear bad things about their daddy or their God. And so they're not going to pay attention to that. So they don't see that the root of the problem is the warfare state with respect to terrorism and civil liberties. I mean, this notion of, torturing Americans and assassinating Americans and the authority to round Americans up and torture Americans and indefinitely detain them and ignore jury verdicts in terrorism cases in federal court. I mean, it's incredible. And it's all rooted in this foreign policy. But so all you got to do is dismantle the empire. This is what we keep telling Americans, that libertarianism stands for restoring a limited government republic. And that's the kind of system our founding fathers had. They said, we don't go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. They're monsters meaning dictators and so forth. Their solution was entirely different. Instead of going over and dropping bombs on people, that opened the borders, so that people could immigrate if they could flee the tyranny and wanted to flee the tyranny or the oppression or the starvation. Open the borders so that they'd have a nation that would not repatriate them, not force them back, which of course is what the U.S. government does today and has for many decades, along with every other government. I mean, that's what made America different, was that this notion of, no, Our government is not going to have the means to go by and free you from dictatorship or whatever you're suffering under. But if you can get out, we won't send you back like all the other countries will. So it was really a fantastic system we had here. I mean, when they talk about exceptional America, I mean, it really was exceptional. Was it perfect? Of course not. You know, we know there was slavery. We know there were terrorists. We know there were lots of minor exceptions when it comes to freedom. But the fact is, Americans live without Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare. They live without an empire, militarism, standing army, and they were tough people. I mean, they believed in self-reliance and voluntary charity, and I mean, and this is where we libertarians are sympathetic to the founding notions of America, the principles of fundamental rights and limited government and a constitutional republic, and that's why we oppose things like militarism and standing armies and empires. I mean, this nation was born in resistance to empire, and yet here we are proclaiming the virtues, or at least the statists are proclaiming the virtues of empire. Now, how do you fund government? Well, I would say let it be funded voluntarily. I mean, we rely on voluntary support for churches and museums and merchandise and so forth. I think most people do believe in government. I think they would fund it. But if that's too far to go for some people, because that's like shocking sometimes. Oh, no, we got to force people. All right, well, then go with an indirect tax. I mean, that's what the founding fathers had. Tariffs or something like that, but just to pay for this minimal function of government, because when you don't have a welfare state, massive welfare state and a massive warfare state, your expenses of government are minimal, and so we don't need an income tax. We don't need an IRS, and this is what again distinguishes us from the statists. You will never see the statists calling for a repeal of the income tax and the IRS. But, they say, oh, no, how would we live? How would we live without the income tax and the IRS? Well, Americans did live without an income tax and an IRS for some 120, 30 years. Why? Because they believed in the fundamental right of people to get everything, to keep everything they earn and decide for themselves what to do with it. I mean, again, remember, this is what libertarians define as freedom. The right to engage in any peaceful activity, and that means opening a business, providing goods and services that people want to buy, accumulating the fruits of your exchanges, building up your capital base, going on vacation, helping your parents out, helping the church out, spend some of your money, donate some of it, invest some of it. This is the essence of a free society. So we wouldn't even have income tax or IRS. You make it, you keep everything you earn. Now, notice the raise. I mean, calculate what you've paid in income taxes over the last 10 years. Let's assume it's, $30,000 a year. You'd have $300,000 in your bank account right now, plus interest, compound interest. That's a lot of money to pay insurance premiums, and doctor bills, and so forth. And that's what we often forget. That when we abolish these welfare, warfare state programs, we also abolish the taxes that they go to pay for that. And, oh, by the way, we also abolish the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve is simply the vehicle that government uses to pay off its debt and its spending when it starts getting out of control. That's the purpose of the Fed. That's what the Fed's done. That's why the dollar is worth about 5% of what it was worth when the Fed was established in 1913, because they've just flooded decade after decade the market with newly printed money, which is what they're doing today. That's why, commodities are rising across the board, gold, silver, oil, everything. And it's going to translate into the retail. I mean, you see it at the gas pump, but you're going to see it all across the board, grocery stores and so forth. And, of course, the statists are going to do their standard little game, exclaiming against greed and calling for price controls, because they cannot see that the root of the problem, or they won't see that the root of the problem is their welfare state and their warfare state. That it's the out-of-control spending and that produces the out-of-control debt that then induces the Federal Reserve to print the money to pay the debt, because the politicians don't want to raise taxes to pay off the debt, because that makes people mad. And most people have no idea that what the Federal Reserve is doing by debasing the currency. So they blame it on greed or OPEC or illegal aliens or whatever. but never, ever blame it on the state because, again, the state is God. The state is their daddy. They're never going to see that these commodity prices soaring, gold, silver, and oil and so forth, is a direct reflection of the debasement of the currency that the Fed's been engaged in. Public schooling is another important area. I mean, this is where the state, takes control over people at a very formative age, 6 years old, all the way to the 18, and drills into them, molds their mind into deference to authority, accepting our doctrines, that you live in a free country. You live in a free country. You pledge allegiance. I mean, the Pledge of Allegiance is one of the most humorous aspects of this whole thing, because the statists will formally say, we're not socialists. We're not socialists. We hate socialism. Well, then they support all the socialist programs, and then they love the pledge. I mean, they still do it as adults, which is so fascinating to me, because the pledge was written by a socialist. I mean, our founding fathers and our ancestors would have never believed in a Pledge of Allegiance. I mean, America went for more than 100 years without a Pledge of Allegiance. European countries had a Pledge of Allegiance, but that was why people fled Europe. They didn't like that kind of statism and stuff. But here, it's all part of the process. And this is where they mold the kids' minds into, you live in a free society. This is a free enterprise system. Franklin Roosevelt saved America's free enterprise system with the welfare state. Boy, if it hadn't been for Franklin Roosevelt's, timely welfare state, America would have gone down the tubes and stuff. Well, what they're teaching is free enterprise failed. I mean, that's the central message in the public schools in the Great Depression. And Franklin Roosevelt saved free enterprise with some minor reforms. Well, it wasn't anything like that, as libertarians have continued to emphasize decade after decade. The Federal Reserve caused the stock market crash and the Great Depression through its finagling of money, the supply of money. And then, so the government caused the Great Depression, and then the government used this emergency to revolutionize American life through the adoption of the welfare state. But that's the purpose of public schooling, is to mold that mindset, and it works. I mean, you have a kid in there for 12 years, day after day after day, having his mind molded, and notice what happens to the kids that resist, that say, instinctively say, this is a bunch of bull. And they start walking around and they're bored and all this, because, this is a government institution. I mean, who's not going to get bored by it, well, they put them on drugs. They want to fight the war on drugs, except for these kids that are resisting their system. You put Ritalin on, you inject them with Ritalin or Adderall or whatever, and of course the parents go along with it because they're products of the system. They defer to authority. Oh, if the authority says something's wrong with my kid, oh, it must be. Give him the drugs, and of course the idea is to soften, make the brain mush, the mind mush, until he becomes one of them, a statist that says, oh, thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free with the welfare state and the warfare state and so forth. Well, this is, again, what distinguishes libertarians. We have a healthy mindset. We recognize delusion when it's delusion. We recognize a lie when it's a lie. Statists are not able to do that. So they look at places like Cuba and say, oh, well, yeah, that's socialist Cuba. And then we say, but they have free health care in Cuba, free government-provided public schooling all the way through college. They have government taking care of people. They have income taxation there. Yeah, well, it's socialism when they're running it, but free enterprise when American bureaucrats and politicians are running it. Well, this is nonsense. I mean, this is just pure nonsense. I mean, I often wonder whether that's why, part of the reason why there is a drug problem in America is that, people are living this life of delusion and life of the lie, honestly believing they've convinced themselves that this is freedom. Remember, this is Goethe. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And I don't think anybody would deny that most Americans honestly think they're free. They're convinced of it. And how can that not screw up a person when he's living a life of delusion, a life of the lie? Borders, another big area distinguishes libertarians from conservatives and liberals. They want to build the walls. They love immigration controls, as we've pointed out over the years, libertarians, is that this is just another socialistic central planning program. That this is government planning the peaceful economic decisions of millions of people. A labor market, a complex labor market. And as I said last week, when you've got socialistic central planning, government bureaucrats, commissioners, Congress, or whatever, trying to decide the right allotment of people, the right qualifications of people, this is just nonsense. Because the market, the free market, the black market, is operating instantaneously. It's changing every minute. So whatever plan they come up with, how many quotas from each country and how long it's going to take and how long you got to stand in line, is totally irrelevant. Because employers are over here demanding employees right now. And that's why people violate these laws, because there's opportunity to be made. People trying to improve their well-being. They're trying to pursue happiness. And we say, as libertarians, just open up the borders. Have a free market, free movements of people. The same way we do domestically. We don't have immigration and trade restrictions between each state. And I think we all know that helps in terms of economic prosperity, that we don't have these things. Well, the same principle applies internationally. And we see that to a certain extent with the EU countries, where, the statists used to say, oh, gosh, we've got to dismantle, we can't dismantle the controls between Italy and France and, the EU countries. Well, they did, and now people are free to go back and forth to countries and work there and so forth. And, the borders didn't disappear. Sovereignty didn't disappear. All the governments are still there. So, and again, there's the moral case, the case of the right to engage in peaceful activity, and that fundamental rights, they adhere to all men, not just Americans. Gun control is another area we stand against, especially in the liberals. We see the real advantage of gun control in these Middle East dictatorships. People don't have a way to shoot back at these goons. They don't have a way to revolt. That they've got dictatorships. They want them ousted, but the dictatorship has all the guns, and it just starts shooting people indiscriminately, murdering them. And many of these dictatorships are U.S. supported. U.S. gave them the guns. It gave them the training, because the dictators are part of the empire. And this is why you've got this double standard hypocritic system going on right now, where Obama's saying, oh, I want to help the Libyan people. Oh, but I want to help the Yemen dictator and the Egyptian military dictatorship and the Bahrain dictatorship and the Jordanian dictatorship and the Saudi dictatorship. I mean, it's just nonsense. But in any event, that's the whole idea of gun ownership, is the right to resist tyranny. And, it's an insurance policy, too. It makes would-be tyrants think twice before they take over in a coup or, take charge in an emergency and so forth, is that when they know people are armed, they have the ability to resist the rapes and the indiscriminate killings and the torture and so forth. They think twice. But, of course, the nations of Europe, the Middle East, and so forth, have been disarmed for centuries. And so when they do get a tyrant, a tyranny, a dictatorship, there's really not much they can do about it except just protest and keep getting killed and maybe get lucky. The point is that, for several years, decades now, we've been on the road to statism. The liberals and the conservatives have taken America down this road to statism. The welfare statism, the warfare statism. And this is why this country is in bad shape. This is the root of the problem. This is the root of terrorism. This is the root of the bankruptcy, the out-of-control spending, the national debt. It's statism. That's the root of the problem. And Americans can sit here and twiddle their thumbs and play this game of left versus right and whose reform plan is going to be more beneficial. But every time we delay, things are only going to get worse. We libertarians are offering a completely different paradigm, a paradigm that's based on the principles on which America was founded, the principles of the Constitution, limited government, fundamental rights, moral principles. This is the way of life that will get us on the road to prosperity, to capital accumulation, to charity. This is the ideal way of life. This is what improves the lot of mankind, is the free market, the private property system, that our ancestors pointed to, albeit imperfectly, that we need to restore that and then build on it. And that's the only solution there is. I mean, this is why we libertarians keep saying this is the only solution. It lies not in the reform of the welfare state or the warfare state. It lies in the adoption of an entirely new paradigm. That's the show. Thanks so much for tuning in, and y'all have a very happy Easter tomorrow, and I'll see you next week. Bye.